The topic for today is the Real Estate Development and Regulation and Development Act, the RERA for short. This is a central legislation which is meant to be implemented by the states. Now, what exactly is meant by that? How are the states to implement this legislation? The states are to implement this legislation by appointing RERA authorities in each of these states, which would then implement the provisions of the Act and ensure that they are complied with. This Act really regulates the sale of apartments, plots, which may be with or without structures, buildings, as well as real estate projects. First of all, let me give you a broad overview of the Act, of the framework of the Act. So first of all, to ensure the objective of transparency, the Act provides for registration of real estate projects with full disclosure of all relevant information which a purchaser may need to decide as to whether he wants to purchase or not. Secondly, it provides for the duties of promoters, the duties of purchasers or allottees as they are called, and the duties of real estate agents or brokers in common terms. For ensuring compliance of all these duties, there are three authorities which have been set up, which are supposed to be set up under the Act. The first, of course, is the RERA authority, which is the main authority. This is the registering authority. This is the authority to whom complaints can be made. It is the authority which is responsible for fulfilling all the, to ensure that all the obligations are fulfilled. The second authority is the adjudicating officer. Now, the adjudicating officer is a judicial officer. This officer is an officer of the rank of a district judge who is appointed by the RERA authority. This adjudicating officer is entrusted with the function of conducting an investigation and determining the compensation which has to be paid in cases of complaints under sections 12, 14, 18, and 19 of the Act, which we shall be getting to later. The third authority which is set up under the Act is the Appellate Tribunal, of course. Now, the Appellate Tribunal is the tribunal or the body which hears appeals against decisions of the RERA as well as the adjudicating authority. Now, Section 27, Section 72 clearly lays down the guidelines to determine what the reasonable compensation should be. And that is the manner in which the adjudicating officer will determine the compensation, and ultimately the appellate tribunal will decide whether that is correct or not. Ultimately, there is a second appeal from the decision of the appellate tribunal, which goes directly to the High Court. Now, the Act does not specifically say that the second appeal must be on a question of law only, but it says that the second appeal must be in accordance with Section 100 of the CPC. Now, Section 100 of the CPC provides that unless there is a substantial question of law, there is and a second appeal would not be maintainable. So therefore, it follows that unless there is a substantial question of law involved in a decision of the appellate tribunal, there could be no appeal to the High Court. This, in fact, has also been confirmed by a single judge of the Bombay High Court, that without a substantial question of law, there can be no appeal filed to the High Court. Now, this is as far as the civil consequences of non-compliance of the obligations is concerned. What are the penal consequences? There are several penal consequences provided for in the Act. In fact, non-fulfillment of almost every obligation, or every obligation, I think I could say every obligation is faced with penal consequences. There is a penal consequence for non-registration. There is a penal consequence for providing false information. There is a penal consequence for failing to comply with the orders of the authority or of the appellate tribunal. In fact, in case of the appellate tribunal, there is an imprisonment of up to 3 years, or even fine up to 10% of the project cost which is provided, which really is a very grave consequence. So therefore, there are various obligations which are provided in the Act, and these obligations, the Act makes full provision to ensure that these obligations are complied with and they are not merely on paper. Now, if you look at Section 79 of the Act, Section 79 says that no civil court would have jurisdiction in respect of any matter which the RERA has to decide. What does that mean? That means that, for example, if the RERA has the right to decide upon interest or decide upon compensation for delayed possession, you can't file a suit for the same thing. the jurisdiction of the courts would be barred in that case. So in such a situation, the question was as to would the jurisdiction of the consumer courts be barred? Because would they be covered by Section 79 also? But that I think the Delhi High Court has set to rest, because the Delhi High Court has held in a decision in the M3M case, relying upon the Supreme Court decision in the Pioneer Urban Land Infra case, that there are all remedies which are open to a flat purchaser. They are remedies under the RERA, they are remedies under the Consumer Protection Act, and there are also remedies under the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code. So relying upon that, the Delhi High Court has said that therefore the two proceedings can go on concurrently. You need not necessarily withdraw your consumer proceedings simply because your RERA proceedings are made available. Now, practically, I find certain difficulties in this. What if, for example, the same matter is to be decided by the consumer court and the RERA on whether there was any default, whether possession was agreed to be given by a particular date, or any question of fact which has to be decided by both parties, by the authority. There could be contradictory findings of fact, in my opinion. So then what happens in such a case? So, but anyway, this is the law which has been, as of now, this is the law, this is what the Delhi High Court has said, and this is what we are really following today. Now, we get into the registration of the real estate projects and real estate agents. And this is provided in sections 3 to 10 of the Act. Now, when is registration required for a real estate project? When is registration required? Prior to even offering to sell or even advertising, a promoter must necessarily register his project. He must necessarily register with the RERA. Now, of course, there are 3 exceptions to this. The first is that if at the time of commencement of the Act, the completion certificate had already been obtained in case of a project which was already ongoing, then of course there is no question, there is no requirement for registration. The second exception is, the section 3 specifically says this, that if the area of the real estate project is less than 500 square meters, or if the number of flats to be sold, or the number of apartments to be sold is less than 8, then registration would not be required. Now, a lot of RERA authorities around the country were interpreting this to mean that both the conditions must exist simultaneously. Therefore, necessarily the area must be less than 500, and necessarily the number of apartments to be sold must be less than 8. Only then is registration not required. Now, look at a situation like this, that if the area is, say, around 300 square meters, and the number of apartments to be sold is 10, then in that case, the RERA authorities said that, sorry, you require registration because both the conditions are not fulfilled. But the Maharashtra Appellate Tribunal has taken a different view. In the case of Gitanjali Aman Constructions versus Rishikesh Ramesh Paranspe in July 2019, by a majority of 2:1, they have held that any one of the conditions must exist. So in the example given earlier, if 300 square meters is the area and the number of flats to be sold is 10, even then registration is not required as per the Maharera. Now, of course, this issue does not seem to have gone to the High Court, so there isn't a final decision really in that sense. But until then, this is what the Maharera has said. The third exception is in case of renovation or repair or reconstruction, where no marketing is involved. There are no new units which are allotted. In such cases, registration is not required. Now, what is the information which must be given by the promoter for registration? What is this information? First of all, he must give details of his company. He must give details of the registration, whether it is a company, whether it is a partnership firm, a proprietorship, the registration details, the registration documents. Then he must provide the details of his background, meaning the last 5 years projects, if they have been delayed, if any cases are pending, why was the delay, on what basis were the cases filed, what has happened to them, what is the current status, etc. So all of this is necessary so that the buyer can make an informed decision. So when the buyer goes onto the website and sees all these details, he decides whether he can put in his hard-earned money for the project and decide to purchase or not. One very important declaration which the promoter is required to give under this section is a declaration, one, of course, that there is no defect in title, and two, that whatever money is received by him, 70% of that will be maintained in a separate account in a scheduled bank, and that will be allowed to be withdrawn only if it is certified by a chartered accountant or a chartered accountant, an architect, and an engineer. Now, the section specifically also says that all the money cannot be withdrawn at one time. The money that can be withdrawn has to necessarily be in proportion to the completion of the project. So if 5% of the project is completed, you cannot withdraw 80% of the amount which is deposited, right? And of course, the section also clearly provides that these accounts are to be regularly audited. So there are full safeguards to ensure that the money is not used for other purposes, because in a lot of cases, what used to happen was that the builder used to receive money from the purchasers. And then instead of using it for the project for which he had received the money, he would put the money somewhere else, probably for some other project or for some other work of his. And ultimately, the purchasers would be the sufferers, right? So this is a safeguard against that. Section 6 provides for extension of registration in some cases. Now, this is not something which can be granted as a matter of course. Section 6 is very clear that only in the case of force majeure will the extension be granted. Now, force majeure has also been very clearly defined in the Act. It is not a very broad definition, it is a very narrow definition. And apart from that, wherever, in any case, when there is no default on the part of the promoter and the promoter makes an application for extension, he is granted such an extension, but that extension will be granted maximum for a period of 1 year, not more than that. Now, Section 7 of the Act provides for revocation of registration in some cases. So if there is any sort of default on the part of the promoter, the authority has a right to revoke his registration. If the promoter indulges in some unfair trade practice, the promoter has a right, or the authority has the right to revoke his registration. Now, what is an unfair trade practice? An unfair trade practice is also clearly defined. So if a false representation is made, any fraudulent statement is made, if it is represented that certain facilities will be granted, but those facilities are not intended to be granted or not granted, so that would constitute an unfair trade practice, and that might lead to revocation of registration. Now, just because the authority has the right to revoke the registration does not mean that it will necessarily do so, right? In a particular case, in the interest of the allottees, if the authority is of the opinion that there should be some terms and conditions imposed upon the promoter, and the promoter should be permitted to continue, the promoter is generally permitted to continue with the imposition of such terms and conditions, only in the interest of the allottees. Now, in very grave cases, if the registration is revoked, what happens then? Are the promoters left in the lurch? Is the project left incomplete? Certainly not, right? It could not be that way. So the law makes a provision for that. First and foremost, the amount which is deposited, the 70% amount which is deposited in a separate bank account, the RERA immediately issues a direction to the bank to freeze the account. So that money then later on can be used by RERA in the manner it feels necessary for the project. Secondly, the RERA may then consult the state government and decide on how the project must be completed. The first right of refusal is given to the Association of Allottees. Now, obviously, the main interest in the whole project is that of the allottees. So therefore, naturally, it is fair that they should get the first right. So if they want to form an association and themselves develop the project, they are given that option. In the event that they do not take that option, either the competent authority, maybe that is a municipal body, like the BMC, could be asked to complete the project, or the RERA may decide on any other manner in which the project must be completed. But the RERA will ensure that the project is completed and people's monies are taken care of. Now, after registration of real estate projects, we get to registration of real estate agents. Sections 9 and 10 of the Act cover this. So this is basically just saying that a real estate agent cannot act without registration. And also he cannot indulge in any unfair trade practice, which again is defined. And if he indulges in an unfair trade practice, his registration is automatically revoked. Then we come to the major part of the Act, which is sections 11 and 18. Now these deal with the duties and functions of promoters. Now, before we get to what these duties and functions are, I would like you people to, if possible, notice the definition of promoter in section 2ZK. If you have the BEAR Act, you could have a look at it. So section 2ZK clearly says that promoter is not necessarily only a private builder. A development authority or a public body also could be said to be a promoter in respect of apartments which are allotted by them out of state funds. So therefore, naturally, the development authority or the public body would also be covered by the provisions of RERA and would also have to fulfill the obligation. Now, what are the duties which the promoter has to fulfill? What are his obligations? So section 11 is very clear about that. There are a host of duties which are set out. I will just enumerate a few of those. The first is, of course, that he must set up a web page on the RERA website where he must give quarterly updates. He must, when selling, give all the information. He must give the plans. He must give the specifications. He must give the date of completion necessarily in the agreement for sale. He must give the date of completion. Of course, he must obtain the CC, that is the completion certificate. He must obtain the occupation certificate. It is the obligation of the promoter to form an association of the allottees after 51% of the flats are booked. And that the section says majority, so that would mean 51%. After 51% of the flats are booked, it is the duty of the promoter to ensure that an association like a cooperative society of the allottees is formed. It is also the duty of the promoter to ensure that the deed of conveyance, after the occupation certificate is obtained, the deed of conveyance is ultimately entered into, and the association of allottees gets clear title. Now, section 12 is a very important section because it provides for payment of compensation to an allottee. So in the event that a person purchases a flat or an apartment based on an advertisement or a prospectus or a model apartment, and ultimately that advertisement is found to be false. So the model apartment is something and what he is given is something else, and he sustains a loss as a result of this, he's entitled to compensation. Now, what happens in such a case? Is he supposed to necessarily continue with the project? No, not necessarily so. He is also given the option to withdraw. So if he desires to withdraw from the project, he is entitled to an entire refund of the money that he has paid. He's entitled to interest on the entire refund. And as per the rules, the interest currently is the SBI marginal lending rate plus 2%, which comes to around 10.6% or so. So that's substantial. And plus he's also entitled to compensation. Section 13 is another important section because it makes it clear that without entering into an agreement for sale and having the agreement for sale register, a builder cannot take any advance which is more than 10% of the total price. Now, this kind of safeguards the purchasers because the agreement is supposed to contain a lot of clauses. Of course, the format is given in the rules. The section 13 also specifically states what the agreement must contain, and that is all for the protection of the purchasers. So, therefore, there is a specific requirement that before taking an advance of more than 10%, the agreement must be entered into and it must be necessarily registered. Now, section 13 also says the interest rate which has to be paid in case of default by the promoter or by the purchaser must be mentioned in the agreement. Now, if you see the definition of interest in the Act, it specifically says that the interest must be the same. The percentage of interest must be the same. So therefore, this is another very important development for the promoters, because in a lot of for the purchasers, because in a lot of cases what used to happen was that in agreements, because they were drafted by the builders, there used to be one-sided clauses. So in case of default by the promoter, there used to be a very small percentage of interest. In case of any default in payment by the purchaser, there used to be a very large percentage of interest. And there were a lot of disputes also which were filed in the consumer court on the basis of that, because naturally the buyers, after having entered into the agreement, felt the unfairness of it. And if there was delay in possession, a lot of times if the buyers did not make payment and interest rates, very high interest rates were charged, the buyers would stop paying the interest, right? And then ultimately that would lead to a dispute, and they would end up in any of the fora, either under MOFA, they would end up in a civil court, or they would end up in the consumer forum. So this is really meant to obviate those difficulties and make it very clear that the percentage of interest has to be the same. Now, Section 14 of the Act says that it is the obligation of the promoter to make sure that the construction is in accordance with the sanctioned plans. Now, does that mean that he can change or make any changes? If it is in respect of an apartment, then he cannot make any changes without the consent of the purchaser. Whatever is shown to the purchaser as a part of the sanctioned plan and as a part of the specifications must be delivered. If he desires to make a change, he must take the consent of the purchaser. There is an exception to that. There are minor alterations and additions which may be permitted. Now, again, the Act has been very careful about this. Minor additions and alterations have been clearly defined. So while defining minor alterations and additions, they have clearly said that structural additions and alterations, they cannot be included in minor alterations. Secondly, if the builder desires to make any change in the building, which is contrary to the sanction plan, or which is contrary to the specifications, or in the common areas, then he must take consent of 2/3 of the allottees, 2/3 of the association of allottees, excluding the promoter, because a lot of times the promoters themselves keep certain apartments for themselves. So excluding the promoter, the rest of the allottees, 2/3 of them must agree to the changes. Only then can the changes be carried. Now, Section 14(3) is also to be noticed. It is a very important section because it says very clearly that in case of a structural defect or any other defect, either in the quality or in the workmanship or in compliance of any obligation under the agreement, if the same is brought to the notice of the builder within 5 years of granting of possession, then he is required to rectify it within a period of 30 days without any charge. This is a clear obligation. He cannot escape from it for a period of 5 years. Now, if this is not done, then he has to pay compensation. And the compensation will be decided by the adjudicating officer. But now, in a lot of cases, when projects are ongoing and a builder finds it difficult to complete the project, or he loses interest in the project for any other reason, he decides to transfer the project. Now, what used to happen earlier was that the purchasers would obviously feel cheated, because when they are booking a flat, they are booking it based on what they feel is the reputation of the builder, what they feel he is capable of delivering. It is because of the faith that they have that in that particular builder that they are actually going ahead with him. And if suddenly the project is transferred to somebody else, there is a possibility that he may not complete the project, or he may not complete it or in the manner in which the allotee is expected to be completed. So therefore, again, Section 15 of the Act is very clear, and it says that if a real estate project is to be transferred, that also cannot be done without the permission of 2/3 of the allottees, excluding the promoter. Again, this is excluding the promoter. So 2/3 of the remaining allottees must agree, and only then can the project be transferred. And after even permitting such transfer, the Act makes it very clear that all the pending obligations of the earlier promoter must be fulfilled by the new promoter. So just because a new promoter has come into place does not mean that there is an extension of time. He is bound by every section, every clause in the agreement for sale. He's bound by every section of the Act. He's bound by the rules. He's bound by the regulations just as much as the earlier promoter was. Now we get to Section 17. Section 17 talks about transfer of title, transfer of conveyance. So a promoter is required to transfer the title to the association or to the cooperative society within 3 months of obtaining the OC, the occupation certificate. Now, in case of failure to give possession as per the agreement, or because of revocation of registration, is there any remedy? Yes, that remedy is provided in section 18. So in the event that the promoter does not give possession as per the agreement, he is bound to give interest till possession. Now, if the allottee wants to withdraw from the project, he has the option to do that. So therefore, the allottee may ask for a complete refund. He is entitled to the complete refund. He is entitled to interest from the time he paid till the time he receives the complete refund. And he is also entitled to compensation. Section 18 also says that in case of defect in title, if there is any loss caused to the purchaser is entitled to compensation. And in general, there is a general provision in section 18 which says that in case of violation of any other obligation, any of the act, of the agreement, of the rules, of the regulations, compensation is payable, and that compensation ultimately will be decided by the adjudicating officer. Now, the act, though it does seem heavily in favor of the purchasers, also contains section 19, where it sets out the rights and duties of the purchasers themselves, so the allottees. Now, what are these rights and duties? The rights, of course, would be the duties of the promoter would become the rights of the purchaser. In the event that if it is a duty of the promoter to grant possession by a particular date, it is the right of the purchaser to receive possession by that, and so on and so forth. The main duty of the purchaser, of course, is to make payment of the installments as per the agreement, to make payment of the other amounts towards maintenance dues, towards taxes. Whatever is agreed between the promoter and the purchaser must be done as per the agreement. And secondly, he must take possession within 2 months of the OC. So the purchaser is bound to do that, and if he does not do so, the promoter is entitled to file a complaint to the authority. So it is not just the purchaser who can file a complaint, it is also the promoter who can file it. And finally, another duty of the purchaser is that the purchaser must, of course, participate in registration of the conveyance deed. Now we come to the adjudicatory mechanism, or the mechanism of the RERA in deciding disputes. Section 31 provides for this. Section 31 says that any aggrieved person can make a complaint to the RERA. This complaint can be against the promoter, it can be against the allottee, or it can be against a real estate agent. So really speaking, it is not just, I suppose the common notion is that it is the promoter, and generally, of course, complaints are against the promoter. But you can also file complaints against the real estate agents. You can also file complaints against allottees. Apart from that, of course, the RERA also has the power to call for information. So the RERA can call for information from the promoters, can call for information from the real estate agents or from allottees. And this can be in relation to anything concerned with the Act. And this can be either suo motu, or it can be on the basis of a complaint. But of course, it must be with respect to any of the provisions of the Act or the rules or the regulations. The RERA is not bound by the provisions of the CPC or the Evidence Act or the strict rules of procedure. The Act says that it is bound, of course, by the rules of natural justice, which any administrative tribunal should be bound by. But just as RERA has the right to call for information, it also has the right to summon documents as evidence or to summon persons to give evidence. And for that limited purpose, it is given the rights of a civil court, only for that limited purpose. Section 37 then says that the RERA has the right to give directions to promoters, to real estate agents, and to purchasers from time to time, and they are bound to follow those directions. Section 38 says that the RERA has the power to impose penalty or interest for violation of any obligations by, again, any one of them. And the RERA also has been given the power to execute its own orders. And in the event it is not able to do so, it can send the order to be executed to a local court, having local jurisdiction. Now we come finally to the appellate tribunal. The appellate tribunal, a person who can file a complaint to the appellate tribunal is slightly different from just a person who's aggrieved. If you compare section 31 and section 44, section 44 is in respect of filing of a complaint to the appellate, appeal to the appellate tribunal. So either the appropriate government or a competent authority or any person aggrieved can file a complaint. And this appeal may be either against the decision of the adjudicating officer or it may be against the decision of the RERA. And this appeal must necessarily be decided within a period of 60 days. And if that is not possible, and then reasons must be given as to why that cannot be done. So this is really to speed up the entire process. And the appellate tribunal also is bound by the principles of natural justice. And it also has, just as the RERA, the authority, has the power to enforce production of documents or enforce witnesses to come for evidence, the appellate tribunal has the same power of a civil court. And finally, of course, then, as I said earlier, we have an appeal to the High Court, which is the final forum, subject, of course, to an SLP, which in a particular case may be allowed, may not be allowed. So I think I've given you a broad overview of the Act. So thank you very much. And I'll be happy to take questions.
One of the highest voted is, how would Section 18 be functioning when revocation of registration has been done? Say development has been passed to another authority as per Section 8. So would the right of buyer to claim interest, compensation, and withdrawing from projects still continue? And if yes, against whom? Original promoter or new authority?
Yes, it would necessarily have to be the original promoter, because if this you're talking about a case where the registration has been revoked, right? So when the registration has been revoked, the new person who comes in obviously wouldn't be burdened with the obligations. But in case it is a transfer of the project, then he would be probably bound to pay.
The next question is it better to approach RERA or invoke arbitration clause and choose arbitration for dispute between certain clauses between the purchaser and builder?
That, of course, depends on the individual case, but I would think that the RERA would be a more effective forum, because especially if it is a purchaser who is making a complaint, because the rights are specifically provided. There are specific remedies given. There are specific penal provisions mentioned. So I think going for RERA, in my opinion, would be better. But of course, it depends from case to case. If a person feels that arbitration is going to get him a quicker remedy, which I don't think it would, but if a person feels so, he's free to go in for arbitration. But of course, one thing I would like to point out also, which I didn't point out earlier, is that on the topic of arbitration, that merely because there is a clause for arbitration in the agreement does not oust the jurisdiction of the RERA. So a lot of RERA authorities have been clearly deciding that an arbitration clause does not oust the jurisdiction. In fact, the Tamil Nadu Appellate Tribunal has relied upon the case of National Seeds Corporation of the Supreme Court, which was in respect of the Consumer Protection Act, where the question was as to whether arbitration can, whether if there is an arbitration clause, you can go to the consumer forum. And the decision of the Supreme Court there was that yes, because there's a special tribunal established for this purpose, you can, the jurisdiction cannot be ousted by an arbitration clause. But of course, the Supreme Court has been very clear to state that if there is an arbitration clause and both parties desire to go in for arbitration, they're free to do so. They're not stopped from doing it. So that seems to be similarly followed also in case of RERA.
The next question is whether force majeure clause is applicable in the leave and license agreement if there's a lockdown going on in the country.
This is not really on the topic, but I'll try and answer that. I think it would, because in my opinion, because ultimately force majeure is defined to be something which is an act of nature, right? So this is something akin to an act of nature, which has made it almost impossible for anybody to step out or to perform their regular functions. So I suppose it would, yes.
The next question is whether redevelopment projects are governed by RERA or not, and could you name any case law to this effect?
Case law, I wouldn't be having handy at the moment, but I will tell you, if you look at Section 3, Section 3 talks about when registration is required, and there is a specific exception in case of renovation, repair, and redevelopment, where there is no marketing involved and where there is no new allotment. So if there is no new allotment which is to go on, then registration would not apply and the provisions would not apply.
Next highly voted question is, the agreement shows the date of giving possession is December 2018.
Right.
Till the construction is not completed, legal notice has been sent to the builder. So he's pressurizing to take soft possession. The soft possession without OC is denied. So he has installed electric meter and telling to pay electricity bills. What should I do?
So generally, the agreements clearly mention that the electricity charges, etc., would have to be paid by the purchaser only upon possession being granted. Now, there is nothing really like soft possession. Possession in law is possession which is granted after an occupation certificate. So, in fact, the MahaRERA also has been very clear about that without an occupation certificate, you cannot be compelled to accept possession. And you are entitled to say that I will accept possession only on the occupation certificate being granted, and you're entitled to interest for the delay.
Next question is, if the project is completed before RERA came into force, but OC is not obtained by the promoter and flats are sold without obtaining OC, can we move RERA for obtaining OC for project completed before RERA came into force?
That again, now if you look at Section 3, it says that if a completion certificate has been obtained, then there is no requirement for registration. So in this case, if a completion certificate has been obtained, even if an OC has not been obtained, unfortunately, you wouldn't be able to take recourse to these provisions.
The next question is, the amount for parking is collected by builder, but in agreement, he has not mentioned the details of the parking purchased. Then can he be sued under RERA for fraudulent act?
Yeah, so the agreement must also contain full details of the common areas, etc. And the parking would be a part of the common areas. So if it is not specifically provided that a parking space would be granted to the purchaser, then it's possible that you could file a complaint to the RERA. But in fact, the parking being a part of common areas would ultimately belong to the association or the cooperative society. So the cooperative society would be the one allotting the parking to the individual purchasers. So it may not really make too much of a difference if it is not specifically mentioned in the agreement. But if you feel that the cooperative society may ultimately then create problems, then it might be better to approach the RERA and take a direction to that effect.
The next question is, what happens if there are 10 apartments and the promoter is only selling 7 of the above? Does he have to register under RERA or is he exempted under Section 3?
Section 3, subsection 2 says that no registration of real estate project shall be required where the area of land proposed to be developed does not exceed 500 square meters or the number of apartments proposed to be developed does not exceed 8, inclusive of all phases. So the phraseology used here is proposed to be developed, not proposed to be allotted for any reason. So it might be possible to construe it as meaning that even if 10 flats are to be constructed and only 8 are to be offered for sale, still registration would be required.
The next question is, what will the overall impact of the real estate sector due to COVID-19?
Now that would come in the realm of astrology, which I don't think I am very competent to answer. So I can only just probably afford a guess and say that, as the courts would necessarily have to intervene and not hold people to their bargains, at least during this period. This is my view.
One more question, please. Commercial property was built under SRA, but the builder own some liability of BMC didn't complete the project since 2011. Any suggestion whether RERA has any solution for commercial come SRA projects?
Right. So this would be SRA where there would be redevelopment for the existing residents, as well as new developments, right? New purchases, new flats would be sold to people, right? Yeah. So in that case, I suppose the RERA would apply, and for the whole project, it should apply, unless I'm not very sure about this, unless it is kind of registered as two different projects, because there is a provision for registration in phases. But I suppose it would have to be registered as a single project, and if it is, then I suppose you could really file proceedings under it.
What is the role of RERA for coming up Mumbai redevelopment project 2034?
See, I would suppose that if it is only a redevelopment, as I said, then the RERA would not apply. But in my view, if there are also new allotments, then the project should be registered and the RERA provisions should apply. That's my view.
The next question is, can there be two or more accounts maintaining the 70% receivables, since there are projects where there are multiple investors in the project?
Right. So as of now, the section just mentions one account. So I'm not sure if more than one can be maintained. The section says it has to be one account, has to be deposited in a separate account to be maintained in a scheduled bank.
Builder charges for parking, society development charges, garden view, but in agreement he charges extra basic price. What is the use if all things are not on paper? What if he cheats for parking, open stilt, etc.? What is the recourse?
I think that is similar to the question which was earlier asked, no? Whether parking should be included. All the facilities, etc. The Act makes it very clear that all the facilities, all the specifications, etc. must be clearly mentioned in the agreement. And if it is not mentioned, then you could definitely take recourse to the adjudicatory mechanism.
Co-promoter, who is he, and what is the latest case law on this?
So suppose a co-promoter, suppose a person who develops and a person who sells are two different entities, then both would be considered to be promoters. So then they would be co-promoters. And I'm not exactly aware of the latest case law, but I could get back on this.
Okay, the last question for the day is, would RERA grant extension in timeline to complete projects owing to delays attributable to the pandemic?
As I said earlier, yes, I think so, but that of course is my view. I think so, yes.